somebody does not know me or has not seen me in a while, a little bit about me. I'm Yvonne Piper. I'm the now former Director of Education for STD. I am on training staff. In my non-STD life, what little there is of that, I also work as the clinic manager for the Women's Community Clinic. I volunteer at UCSF School of Medicine. I am a volunteer faculty member there, and I teach a course similar to the Talking About Doctors issues, how to teach baby doctors to talk to their patients. So in the course of a lot of my work, STDs have become my favorite thing in the world. They're fantastic, they're easy to catch, they really like you, and we get a lot of questions at STD and in other organizations about STDs. So I'm going to be giving you some of the latest breaking news on STDs. I've tried to narrow it down just a few topics that have been particularly emergent in the news, some things that you may have heard of recently, and I'm trying to make it local to San Francisco. So specifically if you're working with San Francisco clients, this is going to apply a little bit more. I'll try to give you some nationwide epidemiology as well, so that way you have sort of a broader picture, but a lot of it is going to focus on locally what the trends are in STD transmission. So specifically, the topics that I wanted to cover tonight, we're going to talk about HPV. There's been some developments with vaccines and with pap smear guidelines. There have been some changes just to let you know about. We're going to talk about herpes, one of everybody's favorites, mostly focusing on prevalence and testing, and a big thing we're going to discuss is type 1 genital herpes. There's a lot of attention happening with that right now. San Francisco Department of Public Health has released some screening recommendations. So if you were to go to a Department of Public Health clinic and say that you wanted to be tested, we'll tell you what you're going to get and why you might not get what you want. And we're going to do some current local epidemiological trends, so talking about who's got what and how many people have it. I'm going to give you some resources as well, and I'm going to leave plenty of time at the end to answer any questions that you might have. Try to stump me if you want. If I don't know the answer, I'll try to tell you where to find it. One thing I'm not going to do tonight is going over the basics of STDs. So I assume that you have some knowledge about STDs coming in. So if I'm talking about something like gonorrhea, you know that's bacterial, it's transmitted through bodily fluids, it can be cured with antibiotics. So I'm not going to go over a lot of the background for this. If you feel rusty on that, I do have a resource at the end for you to refer to that's a really good free online resource to get some of the facts down. So if it's been a while since you've been through training or you're confused about a few facts, we do have some places you can look, but tonight's presentation is going to sort of assume a base level of knowledge about STDs already. We're also going to have a lot of comics and fails in here because I like them. So, enjoy. I'm going to start off with a piece of HPV vaccine news. So, in 2006, there was a vaccine that was approved against 4 strains of HPV, and it was recommended to be given to girls between the ages of 9 and women the ages of 26. For a really long time, it was hard for people outside of that gender and age group to access this vaccine. So we're going to talk about a few developments in it. One of the first developments that I want to talk about is recently there was a new HPV vaccine that was approved. It's called HPV-2, and it's called HPV-2 because it's bivalent, meaning that it's good against 2 strains of HPV. It's called Cervarix, and it is put out by the drug company GlaxoSmithKline. They happen to be the same people who make Valtrex, so they're one of the large drug manufacturers. This was released back in October of last year, and it's approved for females between the ages of 9 and 26. For whatever reason, the arbitrary number that CDC has decided would really be a good time for you to start is the age of 11 or 12. They give no rationale as to why this is the age they picked. They just say, yeah, age 11 or 12, that sounds perfect. They're assuming that they're going to mostly get people who are not sexually active at that age, though it could be that someone is already sexually active at that age and maybe isn't going to get the maximum benefit from it. So it differs from the vaccine that's been on the market in that it only protects against 2 strains, and they're only protecting against the strains that cause cervical cancers, which are 16 and 18. Those 2 are responsible for about 70% of all cervical cancers that are out there, and it does not offer any protection against genital warts. So the vaccine that's been on the market protects against 90% of genital warts cases as well. This one doesn't have that benefit. So knowing that it doesn't have that benefit, what's so attractive about it? In studies, it seems like it's more immunogenic, meaning that it produces a larger immune response. People produce a massive amount of antibodies after they get this vaccine. People actually make more antibodies off of this vaccine than they would if they'd gotten a natural infection. And so the thought is the fact that they're making more antibodies means that it's going to be good for a longer period of your life. Something that's sort of off-label that people haven't discussed, a lot of parents who have had objections to not wanting to get their kids the vaccine because they're afraid that it's going to condone them having sex. If you take out the protection against genital warts, you now have the vaccine to present to these parents as a cervical cancer vaccine. So the thought is there might be some parents who are reluctant to get their kids vaccinated who are going to find this one more palatable because it's only against cancer and not against warts. We have yet to see what's going to happen. It's really recent on the market, but preliminary studies do show that in terms of the immune protection, it is doing really well. So there is another product that's on the market. Also, some people who have had difficulty accessing HPV vaccine in terms of cost, it runs at least $150 a shot. This is going to be a little bit cheaper because it's only effective against the two. I don't have a cost off the top of my head for this, but it is a little bit cheaper. So some people who are having to pick between the two might end up going with this one because of cost matters. And in case you care what it looks like this. It's pink, like Cervarix. It's called Cervarix. Right, another piece of HPV vaccine news, they have been testing Gardasil, which is the kind of vaccine that's good against the 4 strains of HPV. They're testing it in females between the ages of 24 and 45 years old. So usually if you're trying to get a vaccine and you're over the age of 26, or if you've had over a certain number of sexual partners, you have a really difficult time convincing providers that you need this vaccine. The argument is if you've had sex with more than a couple of people, you've probably already come into contact with all the strains it protects against. So they're thinking that the amount of protection that people will get after they've been sexually active for a longer time is pretty marginal. So for a long time, it was hard for older people to even get tested for this. But there was a pilot study done where they did find subjects they considered eligible to get the HPV vaccine who were over the age of 26. So what they asked were subjects who had no history of abnormal pap smears, had no history of genital warts, and when they did the study, in the end, they found that subjects who did not see benefit, so there were some people who got vaccinated and developed either warts or abnormal pap smears anyway, the thought was they were probably already infected but didn't have any symptoms at the time that they were given the vaccine. So this does prove the point that a lot of people in this age group have been infected, and so getting the vaccine isn't necessarily going to help them, but there were several people in this age group who were helped by it. We know it's just not going to be as effective in people who are sexually active. This is one of the reasons HPV vaccine is recommended to be given to people before they have their sexual debut, as we like to call it. So the earlier you get it in life, the fewer sexual partners you have, you're going to derive a larger benefit from it. But there are plenty of people in the 24 to 45 year age group who did get some benefit from it in this study. Another thing to note is when you are really young, your body has a stronger immune response. You fight off things better and you react to vaccines better. It's one of the reasons you want to get vaccines when you're really young. So you haven't come into contact with things, you have a nice active young immune system. So the people who were in this study did not have a stronger immune response to it. So they produced antibodies, but not as many. So this could mean that someone, even though they've got the antibodies, they might need to get booster shots later in life. Whereas if they had it when they were younger, they might not need boosters. So that's another drawback to this, but still does seem to offer some protection in folks who are a little bit older. And yet another piece of HPV vaccine news is that Gardasil was approved for use in males between the ages of 9 and 26. So this is the HPV-4 vaccine. This is protecting against strains 6, 11, 16, and 18. We already mentioned 16 and 18 as causing 70% of cervical cancers. 6 and 11 are responsible for 90% of genital warts cases. So this was tested in males between the ages of 9 and 26. And it's not that it's even recommended. So the organization is the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. This is the organization that comes up with vaccination guidelines for children and adults. And so what they're saying is they would permit use, but they're not necessarily going to encourage it. And they're only saying that the use is there to protect against genital warts. They're not really talking at all about what it's going to do to penile, anal, or indirectly cervical cancer cases. So they're not entirely sure if the cost-benefit analysis of this is going to justify its use in the long run. One thing that wasn't really explored in the study that I read is what's the indirect benefit going to be to partners. So obviously HPV comes from somewhere. It's not that women are spontaneously getting HPV without having sex with anybody. Ostensibly some of these males would be having sex with these females and could give them HPV. So if they were vaccinated, if they're not carrying it, it's going to have an indirect benefit to the partners, so they would not be at higher risk for cervical cancer. But the way that this is being marketed on-label use is intended to reduce the incidence of genital warts in males. So I find that kind of fascinating. This was being marketed to reduce genital warts cases. We have the other strain that only protects against the cervical cancer-causing varieties. So boys can get the one that protects them against the sexy stuff. Girls only get the one that protects them against cancer. So go figure. Enjoy. But this is probably good news to those of you who are parents of someone in this age group, or if you're in this age group yourself and you wanted this vaccine, it is now available for males. In terms of insurance coverage, that's going to be a little bit harder. Because it's only permitted and not necessarily encouraged, insurance companies aren't super likely to cover it. For females, if they're under the age of 18, there's a government program called Vaccines for Children that they can get this through that will completely cover the cost. Males aren't going to have that same eligibility under Vaccines for Children. So this would be an out-of-pocket cost. I was saying at least $150 a shot, but once again, in the long run, that might be a worthwhile investment of time.